Here is the $500 million contract.
This is a large sum. What are the terms?
The terms are clear. We need your signature.
What is the timeline for execution?
Immediately, sign today.
Elena Voss Holloway sat in the waiting area of the marble lobby, her slim leather portfolio resting across her knees. She had arrived on time for her 10 o'clock meeting with Preston Langford, but the minutes had stretched into hours. The building was designed to make people feel small, with ceilings that climbed 4 stories high and art on the walls that probably cost more than most houses. Every detail whispered the same message: you do not belong here. Elena had heard that whisper her whole life and had stopped flinching at it a long time ago. She checked her watch as her heels clicked across the floor earlier that morning, 2 minutes past her scheduled appointment. She had been stuck in morning traffic on Fifth Avenue, a fact she had already accepted because Elena Voss Holloway did not waste energy on things she could not control. She had built a $500 million empire on that principle alone. The front desk sat at the center of the lobby like a throne. Behind it stood a woman in a perfectly fitted blazer, mid-30s, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her name tag read Lydia, head of client relations. She had the kind of smile that was really just her mouth moving. "Good morning," Elena said. "Elena Voss Holloway. I have a 10 o'clock with Mr. Langford." Lydia's eyes dropped to her appointment book. She ran one manicured finger down the page until it stopped at the entry. Something shifted in her face. A small thing. Quick. Like a door closing behind someone's eyes. "Of course," Lydia said. "He's just finishing up with something. Please take a seat." Elena held her gaze for 1 extra second. Not long enough to be rude, just long enough to let Lydia know that she had noticed. She turned and walked to the waiting area, 4 white leather chairs arranged around a low glass table. She chose the one facing the room, set her slim leather portfolio across her knees, and sat. The lobby moved around her like a slow river. A man in a gray suit crossed the floor, talking into his phone. 2 junior associates in matching navy blazers stepped off an elevator, laughing about something. A courier dropped off an envelope and left. Elena did not look at her phone. She did not cross and uncross her legs or tap her fingers against her portfolio. She simply watched the room. She had learned a long time ago that how you wait tells people everything about who you are. And she had no intention of showing Preston Langford's lobby anything it could use against her. At one point, Lydia appeared from somewhere to Elena's right, walking with a stack of folders tucked under one arm. She glanced over as she passed. "He won't be much longer," she said without stopping. "He won't be much longer." Not an apology, not an explanation, a dismissal dressed up as reassurance. Elena watched her go. She placed her hand flat on top of her portfolio, steady, unhurried. The leather was smooth under her palm. Inside that folder were documents that Lydia had no idea existed. Documents that the man upstairs had no idea were sitting a short distance away from his front desk. That thought settled in Elena's chest like a warm coal. Take your time, she thought. Take all the time you need. The jazz overhead shifted to something softer. One of the junior associates from earlier reappeared, glanced briefly at Elena the way people glance at furniture, and disappeared through a side door. Elena exhaled slowly through her nose. She thought about the meeting she had driven here for. Years of work. Her first company, built from nothing in a studio apartment. Her second, sold for enough to make people start returning her calls. her third and fourth leveraged into Voss Capital Group, multiple corporations, hundreds of millions under management, a contract that had been weeks in the making, and she was sitting in a waiting room chair well past noon. A man walked in at the top of the hour. Elena noticed him immediately. Mid-50s, silver hair swept back from a wide forehead, a charcoal suit that he had been tailored, not bought off a rack. He carried nothing, no briefcase, no portfolio, no folder, just himself and the easy way he moved through a room like he already owned it. He did not stop at the front desk. Lydia met him before he even reached it. She came around from behind the counter with her arms slightly open, her smile suddenly real for the first time all morning. "Mr. Hargrove," she said warmly, "so good to see you. Go right on up. He's expecting you." She walked him to the elevator herself, pressed the button, said something that made him laugh. When the doors closed, she turned back toward the lobby, still smiling. Her eyes passed over Elena, the way you pass over a potted plant. Then she walked back behind her desk and picked up her phone. Elena did not move. She did not shift in her seat or tighten her jaw or let a single thing show on her face. But she marked the moment the way you mark something you plan to use later. Clean, deliberate, stored. No appointment, she thought. Walked straight in, escorted personally. A few minutes. Door to elevator. She looked down at her watch. She had been sitting in this chair for well over an hour by then. The lobby continued its slow performance around her. Phones rang softly behind the desk. Elevators opened and closed. The jazz overhead played something without edges. The kind of music designed to make you feel like time wasn't actually passing. Elena knew better. At one point, a woman appeared from a side corridor. Older than Lydia, maybe late 40s, with close-cropped natural hair, and a name badge that read Maya. She glanced up from the mail she was sorting, and her eyes found Elena still sitting in the waiting chair. Something passed across Maya's face. Not personal recognition. They had never met. Something deeper. The kind of recognition that doesn't need an introduction. Maya walked over quietly and leaned in. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I am so sorry. I don't know what's happening up there." She paused. "Can I get you anything? Water, maybe?" Elena looked up at her. Maya's eyes were steady and serious. In a building full of people performing their roles, this woman was simply being human. "Water would be lovely," Elena said. "Thank you." Maya returned and set the glass down with both hands, careful and deliberate, like it was the least she could offer, and she wanted to offer it properly. Their eyes met one more time. Elena said nothing. Maya said nothing, but something passed between them, a quiet, shared understanding about exactly what was happening in this lobby and exactly what it meant. Later, Lydia materialized beside her chair with the bright, hollow smile Elena had come to recognize as her only setting. "He is finishing up a very important call," Lydia said. "Just a little longer." Elena looked at her steadily. "Thank you, Lydia." Lydia walked away without another word. Elena looked down at her watch. Several hours had passed. She thought about the documents inside her portfolio. She thought about the weeks of preparation that had led to this morning. She thought about every lobby she had ever sat in, every room that had made her wait, every man who had assumed her patience was the same thing as weakness. It never was. At one point, she heard laughter from somewhere above her. She looked up. Preston Langford was coming down the marble staircase with two other men, all three mid-conversation. All three grinning. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy suit with a pocket square. He looked like a man who had never waited for anything in his life. He reached the bottom of the stairs. His eyes swept the lobby and landed on Elena. For a half-second, a fraction of a blink, his expression flickered. A small, unguarded confusion. Like a man who had walked into a room and found something he didn't quite remember leaving there. He recovered fast, crossed the lobby with his hand already extended, smile already assembled. "Miss Voss, is it?" he said. "Sorry about the wait. Come on up." Elena stood slowly. She smoothed the front of her blazer. Several hours. She had sat in this chair for several full hours. She did not smile back. "Actually, Mr. Langford," she said, her voice calm and even, "I've been waiting since 10 o'clock this morning. It is now well past 1 in the afternoon." She held his gaze. "That's several hours." Preston blinked. Then he laughed, a short, breezy sound that treated her words like a minor inconvenience. "The market doesn't keep a schedule," he said. "You understand how it is." Elena looked at him for one long, quiet beat. "I do understand," she said. "Completely." She followed him upstairs. The conference room on the 4th floor was all glass and gray steel. It had a long table that seated 12, though only 3 chairs were being used that day. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Midtown Manhattan, a view that probably impressed people who hadn't earned one of their own. A screen at the far end of the room displayed the Langford Greer logo in navy and gold. Tasteful, expensive, entirely calculated. Preston Langford took his seat at the head of the table without offering Elena a choice of where to sit. He simply gestured toward the chair directly across from him. The way you gesture toward a chair for someone you've already decided is less important than you are. Lydia slipped in behind them and took a seat in the corner with a notepad balanced on her knee. She did not make eye contact with Elena. Elena sat. She placed her portfolio flat on the table in front of her, folded her hands on top of it, and waited. Preston loosened his cufflink, pulled a small remote from his jacket pocket, and clicked the screen to life. A presentation slide appeared. Clean, professional, and completely wrong for the conversation he was about to have. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never once been told no. "Let's talk about what we can do for you." The pitch took 20 minutes. Preston walked her through Langford Greer's entry-level institutional tier, a wealth management package designed, he explained, for portfolios in the $50 to $75 million range. He used words like foundational and onboarding journey and trust-building process. He showed her pie charts and projected returns and a timeline that assumed she was starting from the very beginning. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting. She kept her expression open and neutral. She asked nothing yet. She simply let him talk. Halfway through the 3rd slide, Preston's phone buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen, held up one finger at Elena without looking at her, and answered it. "Yeah." "No. Tell them to hold the position until Thursday." He swiveled slightly in his chair, angling his shoulder away from her. "No, not the full amount." Half. I'll explain later. He hung up without acknowledging that Elena was still sitting across from him. He clicked to the next slide. Elena did not move. Preston finished the slide and moved to the next one. Projected growth models, all of them conservative. All of them built around a client who was dipping a cautious toe into the water for the first time. He explained the models the way a teacher explains long division to a child who keeps getting it wrong. We find that clients at this stage respond really well to a slower, more guided approach, he said, clicking to a new chart, especially clients who are newer to institutional level investment. Elena tilted her head slightly. What makes you assume I'm new to institutional investment? Preston smiled, patient, indulgent. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just our standard process. His phone buzzed again. He answered it again. I said, Thursday. He stood up slightly from his chair, turning fully away from her now. No exceptions. He sat back down and cleared his throat. Where were we? Your standard process, Elena said. Right. He clicked forward. Now, we typically recommend that clients at this level take some time before committing. Maybe bring in a financial advisor you trust, someone you've worked with before, just to get a second set of eyes on everything. He smiled again. There's no rush. We want you to feel comfortable. Elena looked at him steadily. A financial advisor you trust? As though she had arrived at a car dealership with no idea what she wanted and needed someone to hold her hand through the paperwork. She was the financial advisor. She had been for years. She said nothing. Preston moved to his final slide. He clasped his hands together on the table and gave her the look that she imagined he gave everyone at this point. Warm, assured, slightly paternal. Now, I will say, we prefer to start new clients at this tier first. It lets us establish trust and build a track record together before we move into anything more. He paused, searching for the word, substantial. The word landed in the room like a closed door. New clients, substantial. Start at this tier. Elena looked down at her portfolio. She placed one hand on top of it, opened the cover slowly, and looked back up at Preston Langford with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. I see, she said quietly. And what tier would a $500 million portfolio fall into? Preston laughed. It came out easy and automatic. The laugh of a man who found the question mildly amusing rather than serious. He leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly, like Elena had just said something endearing. 500 million? He said. Well, that puts you in a completely different category altogether. That's our flagship Platinum Partnership tier. He gestured broadly, as though painting a picture of something grand. We're talking our top clients, institutions, legacy funds, people who have been with this firm for decades. He smiled at her across the table. Is that the kind of number you're working toward? Elena looked at him for one quiet moment. 13, she said. Preston's smile held. Sorry? You said 12 clients. Elena opened her portfolio. It would be 13. She reached inside and placed a document on the table. She slid it across to Preston with 2 fingers, smooth, unhurried, and folded her hands in front of her. Preston looked down. The document was a preliminary term sheet. Langford Greer, Financial Partners, letterhead at the top. A $500 million institutional account transfer from Voss Capital Group, dated weeks ago, reviewed and initialed at the bottom by Langford Greer's own compliance department. The smile left his face the way water leaves a drain, slow at first and then all at once. His eyes moved across the page, once, twice. Elena watched him read the same lines over and over, his brain refusing to fully accept what his eyes were showing him. In the corner, Lydia Bennet had stopped writing. Her pen was frozen above her notepad, and she was staring at the table with the expression of someone who has just realized the floor beneath them is made of glass. Preston set the document down. He looked up at Elena. Then he did what men like Preston always do when the ground shifts under them. He reached for solid footing that wasn't there anymore. Elena. He spread his hands open on the table. Warm, familiar, as though they were old friends who had simply gotten off on the wrong foot. May I call you Elena? Of course. Obviously, I knew exactly who you were walking in here today. This process, what we walked through just now, this is purely standard. Every client, regardless of portfolio size, goes through the same onboarding presentation. That's just how we, Mr. Langford. Her voice was quiet, not loud, not sharp. It did not need to be either of those things. Preston stopped talking. Elena leaned forward slightly. When she spoke, every word was precise and unhurried, like she had been saving them in a particular order for the last several hours. I arrived at this building at 10 o'clock this morning. You did not see me until well past 1 in the afternoon. She paused. Let that number sit on the table between them. At the top of the hour, a man walked in off the street with no appointment. Lydia personally escorted him upstairs in under a few minutes. She glanced briefly toward the corner without turning her head. During this meeting, you answered your phone twice without excusing yourself. You presented me a package designed for portfolios a fraction of my size, and you suggested, she paused again, that I bring in a financial advisor I trust before making any decisions. The room was completely silent. I founded my first company at 24 years old, Elena continued. I have built and sold 3 businesses. I have been managing institutional capital for years. Voss Capital Group currently holds controlling interests in multiple mid-cap corporations across 4 industries. She let that land. I am the financial advisor, Mr. Langford. I have been for over a decade. Preston's mouth opened, then closed. A vein Elena had not noticed before had appeared along his right temple. His hands, still spread flat on the table, had gone very still. He recovered one more time. It was a smaller recovery than the last one, shakier around the edges. Look, he said, his voice dropping into something harder now. I hope you're not going to let a simple scheduling mix-up cost you a significant financial opportunity. This is business. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Let's not make it personal. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She closed her portfolio. She pushed her chair back from the table and stood, unhurried, the way she did everything. She picked up her portfolio and held it at her side. Thank you for your time, Mr. Langford, she said. She walked to the door, opened it herself, and stepped out without looking back. Behind her, Preston Langford sat perfectly still at the head of his long, empty table, staring at a term sheet with his firm's name on it. Elena pushed through the revolving doors and walked out into the afternoon air. The city hit her all at once. The noise, the cold, the smell of street food from a cart on the corner. After several hours inside that marble silence, Manhattan felt loud and alive and real in a way that the Langford Greer building never would. Her car was waiting at the curb. Her driver, a quiet man named Roy, who had worked with her for years, saw her coming and stepped out to open the door without being asked. He took one look at her face and said nothing. That was one of the many reasons Elena trusted him. She slid into the back seat and pulled the door shut behind her. "Voss Capital," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The car pulled into traffic. Elena sat back, portfolio in her lap, and stared out the window at nothing in particular for exactly 30 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what had just happened in that building. Then she picked up her phone and called Derek. He answered on the first ring. "How'd it go?" "Get Isabella," Elena said. "I need you both in my office in 45 minutes. A pause. "That bad?" "Make the call, Derek." She hung up and dialed Isabella Grant before the phone had even left her ear. Isabella picked up on the second ring with the unhurried calm of a woman who had been expecting to hear from her for hours. "I need a formal contract withdrawal notice, drafted and ready to send by the time I get back," Elena said. Isabella did not gasp, did not ask if Elena was sure. That was why Elena had trusted her for years. "Send it how?" Isabella asked. "Certified courier, not email." Elena paused. "I want him to hold it in his hands." "It'll be ready," Isabella said. Voss Capital Group occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on Park Avenue. Elena had signed the lease on this office years ago with a pen that she still kept in her desk drawer, not for sentiment, for memory, for the specific reminder of what it had cost her to get here and what it would cost anyone who tried to take it from her. She walked through the front doors that afternoon. Derek was already waiting near her office, arms crossed, jaw set. He was a couple of years older than Elena, but had always looked after her like she was the elder one, steady and watchful, a wall when she needed one. He took one look at her face as she walked past him and fell into step beside her without a word. Isabella was inside Elena's office, seated at the small conference table near the window with a single document in front of her. 2 pages, clean, precise. Every word exactly where it needed to be. Elena set her portfolio down on her desk, read the letter standing up, and reached for a pen. She signed it without sitting down. "Send it now," she said. Isabella picked up her phone and made the call before Elena had even capped the pen. The courier arrived at the Langford Greer building that afternoon. Preston Langford was standing at his desk when his assistant knocked and handed him the envelope. He looked at the return address. His expression did not change. He tore it open, unfolded the letter, and read it. "Voss Capital Group is formally withdrawing from all negotiations with Langford Greer, financial partners, effective immediately." He read it again, then a third time. 500 million gone. Not restructured, not paused, not reconsidered. Gone. Before a single dollar had ever changed hands. He called Elena's office. Her assistant answered on the second ring. Ms. Voss Holloway's office. "I need to speak with Elena. Now." "I'm sorry. She's unavailable at the moment. Can I take a message?" "Tell her Preston Langford called. Tell her it's urgent." "Of course," the assistant said pleasantly. "Have a wonderful afternoon." She hung up. Preston stared at his phone. Then he called the personal line, the number he had been given weeks ago during the initial contract negotiations. It rang twice. Then Elena's voice, calm as a closed window. "I expected your call." Preston exhaled. "Elena, listen. This morning got completely away from me, and I owe you a real apology. A proper one. Let me take you to dinner. Let me bring Arthur Greer in personally. We can renegotiate the entire structure. Whatever you need. Mr. Langford." He stopped. "I didn't withdraw because I was offended," Elena said. Her voice carried no heat, no anger, just the steady, even certainty of someone reading facts off a page. "I withdrew because you showed me exactly how your firm operates when it believes no one important is watching." A brief pause. "That's the only data point I needed." The line went dead. Preston stood at his desk for a long moment, his phone still pressed against his ear, listening to silence. Then his expression changed. The embarrassment drained out of it. What replaced it was something quieter and considerably more dangerous. He set his phone down on his desk and reached for his contact list. Preston Langford did not sleep well that night. By the next morning, he was at his desk early, before his assistant arrived, before the cleaning crew had finished the hallways. He sat in his leather chair with his phone in his hand and his contact list open, and he started making calls. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He was far too smart for that. He simply talked. "Just something I wanted to flag," he said to the first contact, a fund manager who had done business with Voss Capital for years. "Heard some things coming out of that firm recently. Instability in the portfolio structure. Nothing confirmed, but you know how it is. Thought you should be aware." He paused to let the seed land. "The founder is talented. I'll give her that. Young, though, in her late 30s, and I think the youth shows sometimes, if I'm honest. Made a very emotional decision this week. Blew up a significant partnership over what I'd call a bruised ego." He chuckled. Easy, conversational, the sound of a man sharing a confidence between friends. Just something to keep in mind going forward. He hung up and moved to the next name on his list. He made multiple calls before noon. Elena did not know any of this the next morning. She was in her office running quarterly projections with two of her analysts when her assistant knocked and told her that one of the groups had called to reschedule their annual review meeting. No reason given. Could they move it to sometime next month? Elena told her assistant to confirm the reschedule and went back to her projections. An hour later, the second call came. Another capital partner wanted to push their review to a later date as well. Again, no reason, just a polite request to move things. Elena stopped what she was doing. 2 rescheduled meetings in a single morning, both without explanation, both from partners she had worked with for years. She sat with that for a moment, then she picked up the phone and called Derek. By the following morning, Derek had the answer. He had heard it from a contact at a competing firm, a man he trusted, a man who had no reason to make things up. Preston Langford had been working the phones, days of quiet, targeted conversations with some of the most well-connected names in institutional finance, planting the same story everywhere he went. Voss Capital was unstable. Its founder was reactive. A woman in her late 30s who had risen fast and didn't know how to handle herself when things got difficult. Derek called Elena the moment he hung up. "It's Preston," he said. "He's running a whisper campaign." Elena was quiet for a few full seconds. "How far has it spread?" "Far enough that I'm hearing it second-hand by now." "Come in," she said. "Bring Isabella." They spread everything across the conference table that afternoon. Every rescheduled meeting, every contact who had gone cold, every conversation Derek had been able to piece together through his network. Elena stood at the head of the table and looked at the picture taking shape in front of her. It was methodical. She had to give Preston that much. He wasn't swinging wildly. He was working a circuit, the same closed loop of old money relationships he had been operating in his entire career. Men who had known his family, men who played golf together and sat on the same boards and moved in the same rooms and trusted each other's instincts the way people trust family. He knew exactly which doors to knock on and exactly what to say when they opened. And he knew something else, too. He knew that the words young and emotional and reactive carried a particular kind of weight when attached to a black woman in finance. He didn't have to explain it. He didn't have to say anything that could be quoted or repeated back to him. He just had to put those words in the air and let the room do the rest. Elena stared at the table. Her phone rang. It was a fund manager she had worked alongside for years, a man she respected. She answered it. "Elena," he said carefully, "I'm going to be straight with you. I've been hearing some things this week, and I want to give you the chance to respond before I draw any conclusions." Elena kept her voice level. She gave him the facts, clean, direct, no defensiveness. By the time she hung up, the fund manager sounded reassured, but the call itself was the problem. A man she had worked with for years needed reassurance. Preston had already gotten inside the room. She set her phone down and looked at Derek, then Isabella. "We need to understand exactly what weapon Preston is reaching for," she said. Isabella Grant did not knock dramatically. She never did. She simply appeared in Elena's office doorway the next morning with a manila folder tucked under one arm and an expression Elena had learned to read over years of working together. It was not panic. Isabella Grant did not panic. It was something quieter and more precise than that. The look of a woman who has just read something she wishes she hadn't and needs to make sure someone else reads it too. "Close the door," Elena said. Isabella closed it behind her and sat down across from Elena's desk. She opened the folder and placed a document on the desk without preamble. "Preston's attorneys filed this yesterday afternoon," she said. "I got the notification this morning." Elena picked it up and read. It was a formal pre-contract dispute notice filed by Langford Greer Financial Partners against Voss Capital Group. The legal language was dense and deliberate, the kind of writing designed to take simple things and make them complicated enough that regular people give up trying to understand them. But Elena was not a regular person. She read every line twice. Then she set it down. "Walk me through it," she said. Isabella pulled her reading glasses from her jacket pocket and opened her own copy of the document. "The filing is thin," she said, "barely legally viable. Preston's attorneys are working with a buried clause in the original pre-contract terms, a dispute provision that technically allows either party to challenge a withdrawal during the negotiation window." She looked up. "It's a long shot in court." Any judge worth their seat would likely dismiss it inside of 60 days. But, Elena said, but the filing itself triggers a mandatory review period, Isabella continued. And during that period, the joint escrow account that was set up in anticipation of the Langford-Greer transfer is frozen. She paused to let that land. $200 million locked, inaccessible for up to 45 days from the date of filing. The room was very quiet. Elena stood up slowly and walked to the window. She looked out at Park Avenue below. The yellow cabs, the foot traffic, the ordinary motion of a city that did not know or care what was happening on the floor of this building. The Caldwell acquisition, she said. It wasn't a question. Several weeks from closing, Isabella confirmed. The liquidity window closes before the freeze would lift. If we can't access that capital, we can't complete the transaction on schedule. She removed her glasses and set them on the folder. If the acquisition falls through, Elena, after everything Preston has been saying this week about instability, the story writes itself. Elena turned from the window. She had spent months on the Caldwell deal, months of negotiations, due diligence, relationship building, and careful financial engineering. It was the largest acquisition of her career, the one that would take Voss Capital from formidable to untouchable. Preston did not know the specifics of that deal, but he didn't need to. He had fired a weapon into a crowded room, and it had landed precisely where it could do the most damage. She walked back to her desk and sat down. "What are our options?" she asked. Isabella had them prepared. She went through each one methodically. They could file an emergency motion to unfreeze the escrow. Possible, but slow. They could restructure the Caldwell financing to reduce dependency on the frozen capital. Complicated, expensive, and likely to raise flags with Caldwell's attorneys. They could pursue an accelerated dismissal of Preston's filing. Their strongest argument, but even the most favorable outcome, would take 30 days minimum. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting. When Isabella finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Who does Preston actually answer to?" she asked. Isabella blinked once. "Sorry?" "Preston Langford," Elena said. "He inherited that firm. He didn't build it, which means someone else built it." She leaned forward. "Who does he actually answer to?" Isabella considered this. "Arthur Greer," she said slowly. "Co-founder, retired mostly, but he still holds a significant portion of the firm." She paused, something shifting in her expression as the implication took shape. "He hasn't been active in years. Preston treats him like a figurehead." "Find out if he's really a figurehead," Elena said. "I want everything. The original partnership agreement, the ownership structure, every clause in that founding document going back to the beginning." Over the weekend, Isabella nodded and gathered her folder. At the door she paused. "And if Greer is more than a figurehead?" Elena looked at her steadily. "Then Preston just made the worst mistake of his life," she said. Isabella worked through the weekend. By the next morning, she was sitting across from Elena and Derek at the conference table with a stack of documents that she had organized into 3 neat piles. Her eyes carried the particular brightness of someone who had not slept enough, but had found something worth losing sleep over. "Start with Greer," Elena said. Isabella placed her hand on the first pile. Thomas Arthur Greer, in his 70s, co-founded Langford Greer, years ago alongside Preston's family, built the firm from a small operation into one of the most respected wealth management houses on the East Coast. She paused. He retired from day-to-day operations years ago. Preston was appointed CEO shortly after. Since then, Greer has had almost no public presence in the firm. Almost, Derek said. Isabella looked at him. Almost. She slid a document from the first pile toward Elena. The original partnership agreement, still legally active, never amended, never superseded. She pointed to a clause midway down the second page. Under the terms of this agreement, Arthur Greer retains full veto power over any legal action taken in the firm's name that exceeds a defined financial threshold. She tapped the number on the page. Preston's filing against us clears that threshold by a significant margin. Elena read the clause, then she read it again. He filed without telling Greer, Derek said quietly. He filed without telling Greer, Isabella confirmed, which means Preston didn't just retaliate against a client. He violated his own founding partnership agreement in the process. She moved to the second pile. But that's not the part that surprised me most. Isabella placed a different document on the table. It was thinner than the others. A summary page with a case reference number printed across the top and the words "Sealed Arbitration Record" stamped in faded red ink below it. Several years ago, Isabella said, a senior employee at Langford Greer filed an internal complaint. Her name is Eleanor Hayes. She was in her 60s now, pushed out of the firm shortly after the complaint was raised. Isabella folded her hands. The complaint documented a pattern of discriminatory client handling practices. Specifically, the treatment of non-white clients in client-facing interactions, waiting times, assignment of junior versus senior advisors, the language used in initial consultations. The table went quiet. She was offered a settlement, Isabella continued. She signed an NDA. The case was sealed. She looked at Elena directly. But the existence of the arbitration record is a matter of legal record. I accessed it through proper channels. The details are sealed, but the fact that it happened and that the firm paid to make it go away is not. Elena sat back in her chair. What Preston had done to her that morning was not a bad day. It was not a scheduling failure or a thoughtless mistake or an isolated moment of careless arrogance. It was a pattern, documented, paid for once already, and then repeated on a morning in the fall on the wrong woman. Derek was staring at the table. His jaw was tight. So, he's done this before, he said. The firm has done this before, Elena said quietly. Preston just kept the tradition alive. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. Get me Arthur Greer's address, she said. Arthur Greer lived in a brownstone in a quiet Connecticut town. A quiet, well-kept street lined with oak trees that had been there longer than most of the people on it. Elena drove herself. No Derek, no Isabella. This was not a legal visit. It was a conversation between two people who built things. Greer answered his own door. He was tall, but had gone slightly soft with age, white-haired, wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked, Elena thought, like a man who had spent his life being mostly comfortable and mostly unchallenged. He recognized her name when she introduced herself and let her in without hesitation. They sat in his study. Books on every wall, a fire that had burned down to low orange coals. Elena did not bring lawyers or theatrics. She simply placed two documents on the coffee table between them: the unauthorized legal filing and the relevant clause from the original partnership agreement, and explained clearly and calmly what had happened. Greer listened without interrupting. He picked up the filing. He read the partnership clause. He set both documents down. For a long moment he said nothing. Elena stood. "I thought you should know," she said simply. She thanked him for his time and let herself out. She drove back to Manhattan without the radio on, watching the trees give way to highway, and waited. Elena was in her office early the next morning. She did not tell Derek or Isabella what she was waiting for. She did not need to. They had both read the same documents she had read. They understood that everything now depended on a man in his 70s in a Connecticut brownstone who may or may not have decided that his co-founder's grandson had finally gone too far. She worked through her morning as though it were any other, reviewed the Caldwell acquisition files, returned 3 calls, signed off on 2 internal reports. She did not check her phone more than usual. She did not watch the door. She simply worked and waited the same way she had sat in Preston Langford's lobby chair, still on the outside, counting on the inside. At one point, Isabella appeared in her doorway. She was holding a single sheet of paper, and she was smiling. Not the small, careful smile she used in meetings, but a real one. The kind that reached her eyes and stayed there. "He did it," Isabella said. Arthur Greer had called his personal attorney early that morning. By mid-morning, he had formally exercised his veto rights under the original partnership agreement. The legal filing Preston had submitted against Voss Capital Group was officially withdrawn. The mandatory review period was cancelled. The joint escrow freeze was lifted. $200 million unlocked. Isabella placed the confirmation document on Elena's desk. Elena read it once, top to bottom, then set it flat on the table in front of her and pressed both palms against it. A quiet, private gesture that lasted only a second before she straightened and reached for her phone. She called the Caldwell acquisition team first, told them the timeline was intact. The closing would proceed as scheduled in several weeks. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a relieved exhale, then the kind of professional gratitude that people express when a crisis dissolves before it fully arrives. She hung up and called Derek. "It's done," she said. She heard him breathe out slowly on the other end. Greer pulled it. Greer pulled it. A pause. Preston is going to lose his mind. "I expect so," Elena said. "Let him." Preston Langford found out around midday. His attorney called him with the news, and the call lasted under 2 minutes because there was nothing to strategize about. The veto was absolute, the filing was dead, and there was no legal mechanism to override a founding partner's rights under an agreement that Preston had apparently never bothered to read carefully enough. He called Arthur Greer immediately after. Greer picked up on the 4th ring. "You had no right to go around me," Preston said. His voice was controlled, but only just. That filing was a legitimate legal action taken in the firm's best interest. "It was a legal action taken without my knowledge or authorization," Greer said. His voice was even and unhurried. "Against a client? Using the firm's name? In direct violation of our agreement." A brief pause. "Clean this up, Preston?" "Tom, this woman walked away from a $500 million. "Clean it up," Greer said again, and hung up. Preston stared at his office wall for a long time after that. By the next morning, the story had moved through the Langford Greer building the way stories always move through closed spaces, quietly, quickly, and in every direction at once. The whispers in the hallways carried a different kind of energy now. Preston had been countermanded. An older man in a cardigan had reached in from retirement and undone something his younger CEO had built. The whisper network that Preston had activated the previous week, all those carefully planted seeds about Elena's instability and impulsiveness, was now carrying a new crop of questions about Preston, about his judgment, about whether the man running Langford Greer actually knew what he was doing. Elena heard the shift through Derek, who heard it through his contacts. She registered it without comment. That evening, she allowed herself something she rarely permitted before a job was finished. She let Derek bring a bottle of red wine to her office, and she sat across from him and Isabella while the city turned dark outside the windows, and the three of them simply breathed for a moment. Derek raised his glass. Isabella allowed her small, real smile. Elena raised hers. She took one sip, set the glass down, and looked out at the skyline with the steady, watchful expression of someone who has climbed one summit and can already see the next one waiting. She was not convinced it was over. She was right. Elena's phone rang early the next morning. She was already awake. She had been awake since before dawn, sitting at the small desk in her bedroom with a cup of coffee and the Caldwell acquisition files spread open in front of her. Sleep had been coming in pieces lately, a few hours here, a few there, which was normal when something large was in motion. She had learned to work with it rather than fight it. She looked at the screen. Derek. She answered. What happened? Pull up the journal, he said. His voice was tight in a way she had not heard since the escrow freeze. Financial desk, top of the page. She was already moving to her laptop. The headline loaded before he finished his sentence. Voss Capital's $500 million sports move. Bold strategy or a young founder's gamble? Elena read the article once straight through without stopping. Then she read it again. It was not a hit piece. That was the sophisticated and deeply intentional thing about it. There were no direct accusations, no named sources making provable false statements. It was built entirely out of implications, each one technically deniable, each one precisely aimed. It cited sources close to the situation, suggesting Voss Capital's recent withdrawal from a major financial partnership reflected volatility in the firm's investment approach. It raised questions about whether Elena's unconventional decision-making style was causing concern among institutional partners. It noted several times in several paragraphs that Elena was in her late 30s. Each mention carefully placed inside a sentence about risk, uncertainty, or impulsiveness. In her late 30s. In her late 30s. In her late 30s. As though her age was the story. As though everything she had built in years could be quietly reframed as inexperience by a journalist who had never built anything at all. Nothing in the article was false enough to challenge in court. Everything in the article was designed to make people doubt her. Preston Langford had not swung a fist. He had opened a door and let the draft do his work for him. Elena closed the laptop. By mid-morning, her assistant had logged multiple incoming calls, several from institutional partners, a couple from board members of companies in which Voss Capital held controlling stakes, One from a financial news outlet requesting comment. The others from contacts she hadn't spoken to in months who had apparently read the piece over their morning coffee and needed to know what was happening. Elena answered none of them. She sat at her desk, and for the first time since the meeting, she let herself feel the full weight of what was in front of her. Not the business damage. She could calculate that clearly enough. Something else. The particular bone-deep exhaustion of being a black woman in a world that needed only the smallest whisper of doubt to start asking whether she truly deserved to be where she was. She had been answering that question since she was in her mid-20s, in every pitch room, every boardroom, every lobby and waiting chair, and glass-walled conference room where someone had looked at her and quietly decided she needed more time, more guidance, more proof. She was in her late 30s. She had built multiple companies and an empire from nothing. And this morning, a man who had inherited everything he had was using a national publication to suggest she might not be ready. At noon, her assistant knocked and opened the door. "Mr. Ashworth's office called," she said carefully. "He's canceling next week's review meeting." He said. She paused. He'd like to revisit the calendar in the new year. Ashworth, years. One of Voss Capital's most reliable institutional relationships, gone from the calendar with a phone call that afternoon. Elena thanked her assistant and waited until the door was closed. Then she sat very still for a minute. She thought about Preston, sitting in his office right now, reading the same article, watching the same calls come in, and feeling for the first time since she had walked out of his conference room like he was winning again. She thought about what it would feel like to simply respond, to issue a statement, to defend herself in the same forum he had used to attack her. She rejected it completely. A response meant she was playing his game on his board by his rules. And Elena Voss Holloway had not built a $500 million empire by playing other people's games. She picked up her phone and called Derek. "Get to the office," she said. "Bring Isabella." She stood up from her desk, walked to her window, and looked out at the city that she had come to years ago with 2 suitcases and a plan. "I need Eleanor Hayes's phone number," she said quietly to no one but herself, "and I need to find Maya Ellison." Elena did not go home after Derek and Isabella left her office that evening. She sat at her desk while the building emptied around her, the cleaners moving through the hallways, the last of her staff heading for the elevators, the city outside her windows shifting from the gray of a working afternoon into the amber glow of early evening. She sat and she waited for Isabella to call back with what she had asked for. The call came that evening. "I found her," Isabella said. "Philadelphia. She runs a small consulting practice. Organizational culture work, mostly nonprofits. Been there for years." A pause. "She's not hiding, but she's not exactly visible either." "Number?" Elena said. Isabella read it out. Elena wrote it by hand on a notepad. Not her phone, not her computer. Paper and pen. Old habit. She thanked Isabella and hung up. She looked at the number for a moment. Eleanor Hayes had walked into Langford Greer, sharp and experienced, and walked out years ago with a settlement check and an NDA, and the particular kind of silence that gets purchased rather than chosen. She had spent years building something quiet in Philadelphia, while the man responsible for what happened to her kept his corner office and his family's name on the door. Elena picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 4 times. Elena was preparing for voicemail when the line opened. Hello? The voice was measured, careful in the way that people who have learned to be careful sound. Not unfriendly, but not open either. Miss Hayes, Elena said. My name is Elena Voss Holloway. I'm the founder and CEO of Voss Capital Group. I apologize for calling you in the evening. I got your number through a colleague, and I promise I won't take much of your time. Silence. I'm listening, Eleanor said. Elena told her everything. She did not sugarcoat it, and she did not rush it. She told her about the lobby, the several-hour wait, the entry-level pitch, the walk away. She told her about the whisper campaign and the legal filing and Arthur Greer's veto. She told her about the article that had run that morning with her age printed several times like a warning label. She told her that she had accessed the arbitration record, not its contents, which were sealed, but its existence. The fact that a complaint had been filed, the fact that money had changed hands, the fact that the pattern had a history. Eleanor did not speak during any of this. Elena finished and waited. The silence stretched long enough that Elena checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Ms. Hayes, Elena said carefully, I am not asking you to violate your NDA. I would never ask you to do that. She paused. I am asking something different. There is a journalist, a serious one, investigative national publication, who is building a story about discrimination patterns in institutional wealth management industry-wide, not firm-specific. She kept her voice even. I'm asking whether you would be willing to speak to her on the record about your general professional experience, your observations, what you saw, and what happened to you in that industry. Nothing that touches the terms of your settlement. Another long silence. Then Eleanor asked one question. Her voice was very quiet when she asked it. Does he still work there? Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Yes, she said. He does. The silence that followed was different from the others. It had a different weight to it. Elena recognized it. The specific, concentrated quiet of a person who has been waiting years for a door to crack open and is now deciding whether to walk through it. When do you need me? Eleanor said. Elena exhaled slowly. I'm going to have a journalist named Lena Vasquez call you within 48 hours. She is thorough and she is fair. You control what you share and what you don't. That never changes. All right, Eleanor said. Thank you, Elena said. I mean that, Ms. Voss Holloway, Eleanor said, and something in her voice had shifted, opened slightly, like a window after a long winter. Thank you for calling me. Elena hung up and sat quietly for a moment in her empty office. Then she called Isabella and gave her Lena Vasquez's contact information and a full briefing. Isabella asked no unnecessary questions. She never did. Elena checked the time when she ended the call. That evening, she wrote 2 words on the notepad beneath Eleanor's number. Maya Ellison. She would call in the morning. Elena was at her desk early the next morning. She had Derek's message waiting for her when she arrived. A text sent early with a phone number and 3 words beneath it. Found Maya Ellison. Elena had not asked him how. Derek had his methods, and they had never failed her yet. She looked at the number. She thought about the woman who had crossed a lobby with a glass of water and placed it on a table with both hands, like it was the only dignified thing she could offer, a small act in a cold building. The kind of thing most people would never notice, and Elena had never forgotten. She picked up her phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Hello?" Maya's voice was cautious from the first syllable, the sound of someone who had learned that unexpected calls rarely brought good news. "Miss Ellison?" Elena said. "My name is Elena Voss Holloway. I don't know if you remember me." "I remember you," Maya said immediately. A pause. "You were in the lobby that morning." "That's right," Elena said. "I was the woman you brought water to." Another pause, shorter this time. "Yes?" "I'm calling because I need to talk to you," Elena said. "And I want to be upfront about why before I say another word. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me this conversation. If you want to hang up right now, I understand that completely, and I won't call again." Silence. "I'm still here," Maya said. Elena told her the shape of things without overwhelming her, the whisper campaign, the legal filing, the article. She told Maya that a respected investigative journalist named Lena Vasquez was building a documented, thoroughly fact-checked story about discrimination patterns in institutional wealth management. Not an attack piece, not a takedown, a story built on evidence, on first-hand accounts, on the kind of careful journalism that held up in the light. "I'm not asking you to do anything that puts you at risk," Elena said carefully. "I'm asking whether you have any observations, first-hand observations, about how clients were treated in that lobby. What you saw, what you noticed over time." The line went very quiet. Elena waited. "Ms. Voss Holloway." Maya's voice had changed. It was still careful, but something underneath it had shifted, like a locked drawer that had been bumped and was now slightly open. "Can I ask you something first?" "Of course. Are you doing this because of what happened to you specifically?" A pause. "Or is this about something bigger?" Elena considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "Both," she said honestly. "What happened to me was real, and it was wrong. But I've been in that industry for years, and I know it wasn't just me. And it wasn't just that morning." She paused. "I think you know that too." The silence that followed was long enough that Elena stood up quietly from her desk and walked to the window. She did not fill the silence. She had learned long ago that some silences needed room to breathe. When Maya spoke again, her voice was slower, more deliberate. "I've kept a journal," she said, "for years. I started it because—" She stopped. "Started again. Because nobody ever believes you, not without proof. And I saw things in that lobby, Ms. Voss Holloway. I wrote them down. Dates, names when I had them. What happened, who waited and who didn't." Another pause. "Who got the elevator and who got the chair?" Elena closed her eyes for just a second. "For years," she said quietly. "For years," Maya confirmed. "Dozens of entries." Elena turned back from the window. "Maya," she said, "I want you to know that whatever you decide, whether you share that journal or not, what you did that morning in that lobby mattered. The water mattered. You seeing me mattered." Her voice was steady and direct. "But I'm not going to pressure you. This has to be your choice, entirely yours. I need the weekend, Maya said. Take it, Elena said immediately. Call me Sunday morning. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. All right, Maya said. Then, very quietly, I'm glad you called. Elena set her phone down and stood at her window for a moment. Then she turned to find Derek leaning in the doorway. He had come in while she was on the call and stood there without interrupting, reading the shape of the conversation from the half he could hear. She has a journal, Elena said. Years of documented entries. She looked at him steadily. If she shares it, this is over for him. Maya called early on Sunday morning, a few minutes before their agreed time. Elena was already at her kitchen table with coffee, dressed, her notepad open in front of her. She answered before the second ring. I'll talk to her, Maya said. No preamble, no hesitation. The voice of someone who had spent the weekend making a decision and had finished making it. Are you sure? Elena said. I've been sure since Thursday, Maya said quietly. I just needed the weekend to stop being scared. Elena felt something move through her chest, warm and solid. I'm going to connect you with Lena Vasquez today, she said. She'll call you within the hour. You control everything. What you share, what you don't, how much you say. That never changes. I know, Maya said. I trust you. Elena thanked her, ended the call, and immediately dialed Vasquez. By mid-morning on Sunday, Maya Ellison and Lena Vasquez were on the phone together. Elena knew because Vasquez sent her a single text message after the call began. 2 words. This is real. Elena set her phone face down on the table and looked at Isabella, who was sitting across from her in Elena's living room with a leather briefcase open at her feet and 4 separate document folders arranged on the coffee table between them. Ready? Elena said. Been ready since Friday, Isabella said. They drove to Connecticut together. Arthur Greer answered his door in the same cardigan he had been wearing the first time Elena visited. He looked at her, then at Isabella, standing beside her with the briefcase, and his expression settled into something careful and attentive. I thought you might come back, he said. He led them to his study. The fire was cold that day. Outside the windows, the Connecticut trees were losing the last of their fall leaves, dropping them onto a lawn that was otherwise perfectly kept. They sat. Isabella opened her briefcase. Mr. Greer, Elena said, the last time I came here, I showed you one piece of the picture. Today, I want to show you the whole thing. Greer folded his hands in his lap. Go ahead. Isabella laid it out in order, clean, methodical, and completely documented. First, Preston's unauthorized legal filing against Voss Capital, already established, already vetoed, but now placed alongside everything else it belonged with. Second, the sealed arbitration record from years prior, Eleanor Hayes's complaint, the documented pattern of discriminatory client handling, the settlement that the firm had paid to make it disappear. Isabella placed the arbitration summary on the table without editorializing. The document said everything that needed to be said. Third, Maya Ellison. Years of dated journal entries, handwritten, precise, and specific. Greer leaned forward and picked up the journal summary Isabella had prepared, a condensed account of the most documented incidents, names and dates intact. He read several pages without looking up. Fourth, the planted article, the documented timeline. The phone records Vasquez's team had obtained showing the connection between Preston's office and the journalist who wrote the piece. The sequence of events that made the retaliation not an allegation, but a demonstrable fact with a paper trail. Isabella placed each document in front of Greer quietly and let him read. Elena did not speak during any of this. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched Arthur Greer read about the firm he had built. He was quiet for a long time. His face did not break or crumble. It simply became very still. The stillness of a man processing the distance between what he believed about something and what it actually was. Finally, he looked up. "Was there a compliance memo?" he asked. His voice was even, internal. Did Preston ever acknowledge any of this in writing? Isabella reached into the briefcase one final time. She placed a single document on the table. An internal memo from Langford Greer Financial Partners dated years prior. It was addressed to Preston Langford from the firm's compliance department, detailing a formal review of client service equity concerns. At the bottom of the page, in Preston's own handwriting, was his signature and the date. An acknowledgement that he had read and received the memo. He had known years ago. He had read it, signed it, and done nothing. Greer stared at the signature for a long time. The room was completely silent except for the wind moving through the trees outside. Then Arthur Greer looked up from the table. He looked at Elena directly, not with guilt and not with apology, but with the clear, unblinking expression of a man who has just made a decision he will not walk back from. "I'll speak to Lena Vasquez," he said. The article went live early on a Sunday. Elena was awake before it published. She had known the date for days and had not told anyone outside of Derek and Isabella. She sat at her kitchen table in the dark with her coffee and her phone and waited for the notification that told her it was live. It came shortly after. Inside Langford Greer, a pattern of bias that cost them $500 million and more. She read it straight through without stopping. Every word she had spoken to Lena Vasquez was there, precise, unaltered, exactly as she had said it. Eleanor Hayes's account was measured and specific and devastating in its plainness. Maya's documented observations stretched across paragraphs of the piece, like a ledger of everything the firm had tried to pretend wasn't happening. The unauthorized legal filing, the planted retaliation article, the timeline that connected Preston's office to the journalist who wrote it, and at the bottom of one page, in a single quoted paragraph, Arthur Greer. The pattern documented in this report is deeply concerning and inconsistent with the values on which this firm was founded. The Langford Greer Board is initiating an immediate internal review of all relevant practices and personnel decisions. Elena set her phone face down on the table. She closed her eyes for 10 seconds. Then she picked it up and texted Derek and Isabella the same 2 words. "It's live." By that afternoon, the financial community had read it. 2 of Langford Greer's platinum-tier clients, both large institutional funds with their own governance boards and diversity mandates, called the firm's main line within hours of each other, requesting urgent meetings first thing the next morning. Neither call was a social courtesy. Both were exactly what they sounded like. By that evening, Preston Langford's personal phone had stopped receiving answers. His PR firm, which had been on retainer for years, sent a single email informing him They were reviewing their contractual obligations before making any public statements on his behalf. Elena did not watch any of this unfold in real time. She spent that afternoon with Derek and Isabella at her apartment. No celebration, no wine, no ceremony. They simply sat together and waited for the next day the way you wait for a tide you know is coming. The next day arrived cold and gray over Manhattan. Preston Langford walked into the Langford Greer building early that morning. He had his phone in his hand and his jaw set, and the particular posture of a man who has decided that the best way through a fire is straightforward. He had spent the previous day drafting talking points with a crisis consultant. He had a plan. The plan lasted until he reached the conference room. Arthur Greer was already seated at the head of the table. Beside him sat 3 board members and 2 outside attorneys Elena had never met. No one stood when Preston walked in. Greer did not allow small talk. He placed 2 documents on the table in front of Preston. The first was the original partnership agreement open to the veto clause Preston had violated. The second was the internal compliance memo from years prior, the one with Preston's own signature at the bottom, confirming that he had read and received it. Greer read the veto clause aloud. Every word. He read Preston's signed acknowledgement aloud after that. Every word of that, too. Preston tried to speak twice. Both times, Greer raised one hand from the table, a single quiet gesture, and Preston stopped. When Greer finished reading, he set both documents down. You filed legal action against a client using this firm's name without my knowledge or authorization, Greer said. His voice was steady and entirely without heat. You were informed of discriminatory client service practices years ago. You signed that memo. Nothing changed. He paused. And then you planted a story in the financial press to retaliate against the same client you had already harmed. Preston opened his mouth. We're done talking, Greer said. Preston Langford was suspended from all executive duties, effective immediately, pending a full board review. One of the outside attorneys slid a document across the table. An access card envelope sat beside it. Preston looked at both items on the table in front of him. Then he looked at the men and women seated along the sides of the room, none of whom would meet his eyes. He surrendered his access card that morning. By midday, the suspension was public. By mid-afternoon, 2 platinum-tier clients had formally withdrawn a combined amount from Langford Greer's management. The firm's assets under management dropped significantly before the markets closed. Preston Langford, in his late 30s, walked out of his family's building carrying nothing but his phone and the silence of every person who had once called him a friend and was no longer answering. The call came a few days after the article. Elena was in her office reviewing the Caldwell acquisition closing documents. Several weeks of waiting finally condensed into a stack of papers that needed her signature by end of week. When her assistant knocked and opened the door with an expression that was trying hard to stay professional, "A Margaret Allison on the line," she said. "Chief Investment Officer at the National Public Employees Pension Fund." A pause. She said she'd wait as long as necessary. Elena set down her pen. The National Public Employees Pension Fund managed the retirement assets of many public workers across multiple states. Teachers, firefighters, municipal employees who had spent entire careers trusting that someone was protecting what they had earned. It was one of the largest pension funds in the country, and one of the most respected institutional investors in any room it entered. Elena had followed Margaret Allison's career for years. She had never met her in person. She picked up the phone. Margaret Allison had a direct voice and a sharp mind, and absolutely no interest in small talk. Elena liked her immediately. "I've followed your career for a long time," Margaret said. "I watched what you built with Voss Capital, and I've been waiting for the right moment to reach out." A brief pause. "I read the article on Sunday. I want you to know that it did not give me doubts about you. It gave me clarity about you." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that. We have been looking for the right institutional partner for a significant capital allocation," Margaret said. "I believe we found her. I'd like to meet." The meeting took place the following week at Voss Capital headquarters. Margaret Allison was in her 60s, silver-haired, and walked into Elena's conference room with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never needed to prove herself twice in the same room. She shook Elena's hand firmly, sat down, and opened her briefcase. The number she placed on the table was $1.2 billion. Elena kept her face composed and her hands still. Across the table, she saw Derek blink once. A single, small, involuntary reaction that he immediately controlled. Isabella, seated to Elena's left, did not move at all, but Elena could feel the weight of what was sitting between them like a physical thing, more than twice what Preston Langford had cost her. The meeting lasted a couple of hours. By the end of it, the framework of a formal institutional partnership had been agreed in principle. The documentation would take a few weeks to finalize. Both women stood and shook hands again at the door. "Long overdue," Margaret said simply. "Yes," Elena agreed, "it is." A few weeks later, Elena signed the partnership agreement at the long conference table in her own building. The one she had leased years ago with a pen she still kept in her desk drawer. Isabella passed her the documents one by one, calm and deliberate as always. Derek stood at the window with his back to the room, looking out at Park Avenue below, and Elena could see from the set of his shoulders that he was holding himself together by an act of concentrated will. She signed her name on the final page, set the pen down flat on the table. She did not make a speech. She did not raise a glass or fill the room with words. She simply closed her eyes for one moment, and in that moment, she saw all of it. The studio apartment years ago, the second-hand laptop, the first pitch room full of men who looked through her like glass, the lobbies, the waiting chairs, the 100 small moments across years of being made to feel like something that needed to be verified before it could be trusted. She saw a marble floor on a morning in the fall. She saw a glass of water placed on a table with both hands. She opened her eyes, looked at the signed page in front of her, and thought, this is what patience looks like when it finally arrives. A few weeks after the signing, Elena sat at her desk on a quiet evening and wrote a letter by hand. She wrote it on personal stationery, not company letterhead, not a typed memo. Her own handwriting on her own paper, the way you write to someone who deserves to know that a real person is on the other end. She thanked Maya Ellison for her courage. She told her that what she had done, the journal, the phone call, the decision to speak, had mattered more than Elena could properly say in a letter. She enclosed a formal job offer, Director of Client Experience at Voss Capital Group, a position that had been created specifically because of who Maya was and what she understood about what it meant to make someone feel seen. The salary was significantly higher than what Langford Greer had paid her. Elena sealed the envelope herself and sent it by courier that same evening. Maya read the letter at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning before sunrise. She read it once, then again. She sat with it in her hands for a long time in the quiet of her kitchen, with her coffee going cold beside her. Then she set the letter down carefully on the table, the way you set down something you plan to keep. She called Langford Greer early the next Monday morning and resigned. On her first day at Voss Capital, Maya Ellison walked through the front doors of the Park Avenue building and stopped just inside the entrance. The lobby was nothing like Langford Greer's. No cold marble stretching to the horizon. No art on the walls announcing its own importance. It was clean and warm, and full of the quiet motion of people who were there because they had earned the right to be. Elena was standing in the center of it, not at a desk, not at a distance. Right there, in the lobby, on her feet, waiting. She extended her hand when Maya reached her, and Maya took it. "Welcome," Elena said. Her voice was warm and simple and meant every syllable. "There's no waiting here. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one." On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.